Welcome back everyone! Today, we're going to finish our first human character, Marcus. We'll be looking at integrating the X-ray geometry like teeth, eyes, and hair, testing the rig and its deformations, and finally, you'll be unwrapping his mesh for texture painting. Let's begin! So the first important part we're gonna do is try to join the extra parts that we added. As you can remember, we began with a model that didn't have a face, and while doing Marcus, we added the eyebrows, the eyes, the teeth, and the hair, and also the tongue. Those extra parts were added from new geometry and inserted into the model, but the model had already been weight painted to the rig, which means that this new geometry does not have any information that's gonna link it to the rig. As you can see, I'm testing the rig. The head moves, the eyes move, and the eyebrows move, because when I was modeling the eyes and the eyebrows, I just extruded the mesh for the eyes backwards and took from there to build the eyes, eyebrows, and the eyelashes. These eye parts have the same information that the head does, linking them at the exact percentage that they're gonna need to be linked with at that height of the head to be controlled by the head bone. But since the teeth and the tongue were added with cylinders that were new to the mesh, they do not have any information linking them to the head, and so does the hair, since it was made aside from the model and then integrated into the model. So I'm gonna very quickly fix them. What I'm gonna do is go to the mesh, select these three meshes, the hair, the teeth, and the tongue, and hide them. Then what I like to do is that I select the rig, I select the model, and I go into weight paint mode. Since I already hid the rest of the body from the hair and the teeth and the tongue, I just have these three objects visible, and I do a very simple weight paint with the gradient tool. As you remember, I just grab the gradient tool, I have its value to 100%, and I just drag it along until it covers all three of these meshes in the red color, meaning their head bone is gonna have 100% of the control over these meshes. What I like to do is just, since I was testing something with the fingers and some other bones, I just hide them away so the rig looks clean, and I go back to weight painting the hair, tongue, and teeth, just to make sure they are working proper. Then I go to the rig, go to post mode, and try it out. As you can see, the hair and obviously the teeth and tongue do follow the head control, but they seem to move independently from the head, which means I have to go and check out what's going on. Usually for these sort of things, what really works out is to just go to these meshes in the weight paint mode, and to the right side on the vertex groups, I like to go one by one and check every one of these vertex groups which equal the bones, and check whether or not these meshes are influenced or are weight painted to another bone that's going to be in control. Because even though they have 100% control, they could also have 100% control from another bone that's far behind and just causes the hair to lag and not move coherently with the head. And I'm not gonna lie, this actually scared me a lot, because I thought that maybe I did something wrong and maybe the positioning of the hair was not gonna work out, but I'm pretty glad I could find that out. Seems like it was actually weight painted to the leg, and that's something that is 100% on me, and you should totally look out for, because when I got into the weight painting mode, I did not realize that I was on the section of the leg bone, and that is a hard thing to control, because since that bone could be hidden, I may have not seen it. It was not hidden, but it was far below from where my view of the character was. But yeah, now that that's done, my rig finally works, and I would like to pose my character just to test out whether or not the rig is functional, if there are any errors, and I go for a quick pose. What I'm doing now is that I'm testing the deformation of the hands, because this part, as I already said before, can be very tricky. The one good thing about doing this right now is that I'm gonna use Marcus as a base for all the male models that I'm gonna have to do. So the idea is that I have Marcus here with his face completely done, clothes, and I'm gonna fix the rig so that there are no more problems on any other male models. I just have to duplicate him and change the face and body proportions and height. So it's very important for me to just fix this hand right now so it doesn't come back to cause any more trouble. So what I do here is that I go to these bones on the finger, and this is one part that's gonna be very complicated. So if you try to touch your thumb and your pinky finger together, you can see that there's a huge mass of muscle and tissue that moves and is pressured. So I didn't actually model this character accounting that, and that's probably something I should begin doing, but there's an easy fix for this right now. It's just a matter of playing with the weight paints, and that's one of those things that you really have to think about, because as I said before, there are many methods of modeling. There are methods for modeling specifically for animation, and you have to be 100% aware of what bones are you going to be moving and what the deformation looks like on a character, so that when you go to this weight paint process, you don't have to go over it manually as many times as I'm actually going through. Also, another thing that I'm checking is the extent of the joints, because as I said, this was a rig that I got from Mixamo, and well, Mixamo is good. It's not perfect, it's not precise. You have to go in and tweak it yourself again, and you can see the weight paint for the fingers does extend far away to other fingers and to other parts that do not need to be controlled by these bones. I have to cut away at it. The good thing for me is that this takes away some of the guessing, because I think it's easier to take away rather than to build from, because sometimes when you're building from scratch, you may get lost a little bit, but that's just a little bit of my philosophy. And yeah, just go and check all of your joints, see their deformations, pose a little bit, and we'll keep adjusting and refining. 100% I recommend doing these steps, because you're gonna have to do it anyways. So why not just fix a mesh that is almost perfect? That's all the knowledge that I can give you, but yeah. And yeah, now my mesh looks clean. I'm doing my pose. I'm checking through the fingers how much they deform. I'm going through my pose, which is also another helpful thing because for models, you may have an idea of their personality, what kind of movements they're going to be making, and it's always very useful to just pose them in ways that work for you as to what the character is like. I just pose Marcus thinking, being cautious. That gives me more about his personality and thinking that, yeah, maybe that's a pose he will be doing for a lot of scenes in the comics. So, of course, I want it to look nice. Obviously, I'm not really going that deep into doing this because there are many tutorials that teach you how to add extra bones, how to add shape keys to control these movements and deformations, and you could look into that as well. But for my approach, I want it to be as good looking and effective as quickly as I possibly can, which of course I'm taking still a lot of time doing this. And yeah, now my posing is done, making for a very compelling character presentation card. My next goal today is to UV unwrap Marcus so that I can texture paint him today and have it pretty much done so that I can move on to other things. So what I'm going to be doing now is selecting the edges that I need to separate and UV unwrap. As we've seen before with the X Factor, this just means to mark separations that are going to make it easier to flatten out the mesh into a plane that you can paint onto and have the texture of the character. As we also said before, the X Factor was a very easy pick because the X Factor pretty much is just a suit over a person, and it's very easy to find templates for suits. Like for example, you could have just gone and looked for how to do a Spider-Man suit and look at the seams of the fabric and have a good idea of how you would cut up the fabric of that model in Blender to just texture paint on it. But this is a person and it's gonna be a little bit rough and tricky, but one of the tricks that I've learned while doing this for some fair amount of time is to take it in sections that you actually need. I do have a good flow of how to separate the meshes in a way that makes texturing Marcus way easier. So as you can see, I began by selecting this line on the eyelids. This is a separation between the inner and outer eyelids. Well, for this specific model, as I already said, it's gonna be the white part of the eye and the outside is gonna be the skin of Marcus. What I want to do now is to divide his head into 4 parts. I begin from the ear and selecting this line that goes to the other ear, select outside to the ear, and I select down until I go to the lower part of the chin, and I select that, so that gives us the front of his face, which if you think about it, with the same analogy of a glove or mask that you can get on your skin, many movie character makeups actually begin this way, in which you have the front of the face and then you get to cover the back with like a scalp or something. If you go look up many of the makeup used for monsters in movies and TV series, you can see that they begin by having a very clear face, and then they can just slap on the person and they just cover the rest of the back, which to me makes a lot of sense. I begin selecting the ears. As you can see, my ears are flat. They don't have any geometry that stands out and makes the parts of the ear where the noise bounces off that allows you to hear properly. That I'm gonna paint it. So that's when I'm gonna take this flat face, cut it out, and then paint over it. Then I go to the lips and I make a division between the mouth sack and the other lips. What I want to do is take the front of the face and just cut it in half. This for me is easier because, and I know this is not the rule, but faces tend to be symmetrical. At least that's the way I modeled my character. Marcus doesn't have any scars on his face, which makes it easier for me to just duplicate the front and back of his head and just overlap those to each other and just get the general look of the skin. Marcus does not really have any moles or birthmarks or scars on his face that need to be specifically tied to one side or the other, and that if they were to be repeated they would look weird. So that's a nice shortcut that goes for me. Of course, that does depend on your character design, which is something you're gonna have to consider quite frankly. But one tip I could give you is that if you're gonna have a character that has a scar on his eye, you can just follow my process, but also take that side of the eye with the scar and cut it out and have these two major faces overlap and have the eye part to the other side and just get your scar over there. That's something you could actually do instead of just trying to replicate the entirety of the face on everything that's not the scar part. And yeah, now I go to the neck. I continue this line in the middle because it's gonna be way easier to just have 2 small meshes of the neck. One thing that I want to focus now is on doing the seams of the clothes because I'm still figuring out how to cut up this face. I like to take a break from these mind puzzles and use the cloth seams to cut up the cloth parts of the model and just do that because that's a very easy workflow. With that done, I go to the hand, and the hand it's already been talked about. I'm gonna repeat the same process that I did for X Factor's hand, you know, just treat it like a glove and cut up the fingers in different parts, and yeah, take advantage of that geometry. That's a very easy step. Honestly, very helpful because most hands don't really have many details anyways, unless of course talking again about very specific character designs. And yeah, then I go to the pants, cut up the areas, and I go to the feet. In this model, the feet are gonna be socks, so I'm not gonna get into any hard modeling about this part, because Marcus right now is supposed to be in his pajamas, but I don't wanna model feet, because that's a whole nother level of problems that I don't wanna get into. But yeah, I just take out the sole of his feet, cut up where his pants end, and do the same thing as X Factor. Cut up this feet portion into 2 and just join them together. One thing that's important for me before I go on to finishing the head is finishing the parts that are gonna be inside, because I tend to have this problem in which I finish finish the biggest, most visible part first, and then I forgot that there's something else that I have to do. So I go to the tongue, I cut it into two. I go to the teeth, I cut out the division from the gums so I can separate them from the teeth. Now the teeth have been individually separated into their own mesh. I cut up the gums into two pieces so I have an easier time just wrapping them. And they don't really need to be that detailed anyways, because we're honestly not going to be looking at his teeth or the gums of his teeth. They're just an instrument that's going to be helpful to have, but not really necessary to have perfectly. But yeah, I just go to the teeth and I divide it in half so I can easily unwrap them and texture them later on. I go to the eyes, and since my eyes are very plain, I just cut them into two. They're gonna be like a circular sticker that I'm gonna paint over. It's very easy, and I just repeat this process for the eyelashes and the eyebrows. Again, these parts are gonna be solid colors, so they don't actually need to be detailed in any form, which just makes it way easier for me. And if I wanted to detail them, I would just add some more geometry to them anyways. Now the hair is a very interesting part. What I want to do now is separate the inside of the hair from the outside. I begin selecting the pieces that are gonna be hidden by Marcus' head, and I just hide that because that really could just be a single flat image that, again, it's not gonna be textured in any meaningful way, and it's 100% most likely not gonna be seen. What I need to do is actually go to the upper part of his hair and divide it into 5 parts, which are the 5 most meaningful parts. So the back of the hair is gonna be divided into 2 UV textures so that it's easier for them to be flattened out. I take the front and divide it into 3 parts just so that I can get the left and right hair strands that go to the sides and give them their special care, and just take sides away and focus on the sides of the hair individually, because again, there are parts that need to be prioritized more than others. Now I do consider my head to be done, and I begin unwrapping it one by one. As you know, this process is very tedious. I just separate it and have to pull vertices one by one until I get through a process that does work for me. So we're gonna speed through that because I'm not wasting any more time on this. Now that all of the mesh has been unwrapped into parts and divided, I have to size it and prioritize hierarchy so that I can fit it into one single texture. It's gonna be easier for me to work with and paint on so that I can easily export them and work on them. This is one tip you should actually keep in mind, because if you're modeling for games, it's very, very helpful to have one whole texture for the entirety of the character. And obviously that means that you have to prioritize what details you need to be more visible and have more space and be more detailed, obviously. So just keep that in mind. But now we go for the fun part, the texturing. What I need to do is add a material that I can use to paint the texture on. So for this part, what I like to do is just use what works. So I take the material that I use for the X Factor, put it on my character, and use a new texture image to paint over. All the texture images that you get from Blender are black. So what I like to do now is begin by having the base skin color, and I'm just gonna begin working on that. So I have my black texture, I just paint it to the color of the character that I want it to be. I begin going to edit mode back and forth, use the face select, and with the L key, select the interior of the hair, clothes, eyes, and other parts of the model that have already been separated from each other so that I can give them their base colors with the bucket tool and focus entirely on shading the character to the style I want. Here I do some adjustments on the eyelashes because they don't fit with the eye socket, so I'm gonna be working on that a little bit before my model looks too weird, because let's face it, it's not looking its prettiest right now. What I'm gonna begin shading now is the face. I base my shading off of the Persona games, as I already said in a previous video. The idea for this shading is that you have your base shadows to make contrast with parts that don't usually receive light that often, so I shade downwards. Because, yeah, I'm not gonna light this character from below as much as I'm gonna be lighting it from above. So I begin with some solid colors, and then with a softer airbrush, I begin doing a gradient from the lid parts of the skin to the shadows of the skin. Then I add some highlights, just so the skin looks a little bit more alive, and I continue moving through the skin because I already have those colors locked down. Here with the hands, I want to use the shading to give the hands a little bit more of that feeling of being more or less realistic while still being a little bit more cartoonish. So I shade the under part of the hands. The parts that bend a little bit more are the ones that have a little bit more skin and thus are a little bit darker. I add some color to the lips. I go to the hair and begin adding the shadows and just soften them up. And yeah, that's generally my process. I'm just going to be adding shadows and highlights to every part of the mesh until I'm done. So yeah, I hope you can actually enjoy this little time lapse for a little while and see how I manage to do my coloring and shading. important part for me is to add some of the extra texture of the clothes. So since he's using some pants for sleeping, I make the seams. The linen model, I just make them darker, so it looks a little bit more like cloth. And of course it looks a little bit weird, but don't think about it, don't overthink it. And now my shading is done. What I need to do now is to fix the material, because you can see it looks a little bit too pink right now. And this is because I made it so the light that hits the model is warm, you know, like yellow, more orange, a little bit more warm, because that's the primary source of light that I'm gonna be using. And the side of the shadows is gonna be cool, like in the blue hues. But since this character's skin is a little bit pinkish, it reacts that way. So I'm gonna be adjusting the color so the contrast looks a little bit better. And yeah, that should be it. I know my model doesn't really look that perfect, so I'm gonna be working on the eyes a little bit more and seeing what I can improve on. But so far, I feel very fulfilled with what I've done. And that was today's video. As always, thank you so much for watching until the end. Let me know if you have any doubts. Please, if you would, rate X-treme Superhero for free on Webtoons. Right now, I'm actually finishing the first chapter of my batch of 5 so that I can begin publishing again. I'm hoping to begin publishing in at least 2 more weeks, so please hold on a little bit more for me. I promise it's gonna be very worth your time. And yeah, as always, if you like the video, give it a like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell so you never miss another video. And yeah, that should be all. So I'll be seeing you around, pals.